some of them are very interesting.
Yeah, and you'll find that the back end of it, the same thing. It dropped it there. Well, that one was signed off by everybody there. It just seemed unusual.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to a regular meeting of the Oak Harbor City Council. It is August 2nd, 6 p.m. We start our meetings with an invocation, and tonight's invocation will be led by Pastor Mark Stroud of the Oak Harbor Lutheran Church. And I invite you to stand and join us, and immediately following the invocation, I will lead the Pledge of Allegiance.
I think I'll begin with the prayer of St. Francis, who is offering a prayer for his responsibility to life and to a loving God. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. So grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console others, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Let us pray. Almighty God, we lift up before you all who govern this town of Oak Harbor, and may those who hold power understand that it is a trust from you to be used, not for personal glory or profit, but for the service of the people of this city. Drive them from cynicism, bless them with unselfishness, grant in your mercy a just and an honest government, and give us grace to live together in unity and peace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Thank you, Pastor Mark. Please join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, looks like we have a full city council tonight, and our number one item is approval of the agenda. I see any changes? Okay, we'll just move forward with the agenda as it is. Item number 2, presentations. We have 2B under honors and recognitions and oath of office, and I think our police chief Kevin Dresker will come forward for this. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor, council members. So I'm honored today to be here and to recognize Mike Bailey. And before I bring him up, I just wanted to say a couple words. So we enjoyed National Night Out the other night, and we very much enjoy that process and that chance to connect with the community. And, you know, law enforcement is a very complex and at times very dangerous profession, and at other times very monotonous and mundane. And it takes a truly special person, in my opinion, not that I'm tilted or have any kind of a bias here, it takes a truly special person to seek out and make a career out of law enforcement. And with that in mind, I'd like to thank all the members of the Oak Harbor Police Department who are here, and all the public servants, including the fire department, who are also here. And we've seen that with recent incidents. We see it nationwide. And we see it with even with our recruiting and how that's affected things in our modern day. As I was going through my career, I'd say the hardest job in the world was being a patrol officer or a police officer on the streets. You never know when you're going to encounter somebody who needs your medical assistance, or needs who wants to kill you, or just needs a routine contact. And of course, as I progressed in my career and went to sergeant, then it was like, okay, the sergeant's the hardest job. And then captain, of course, that was the hardest. And I know really the chief position is the hardest. But it's, you know, you get out of some things as far as what causes you stress and what you have to deal with. and into a whole nother different dynamic. So we're all part, and I think Captain Bailey put it out on an email the other day to our department. Hey, we're all part of the same team. We have different positions to play. And I think that's very true. So I'd like to thank everybody for being here, not only law enforcement, but family members. I know Mike has family here, and visitors and guests, and then all of you for being here today. So I'll proceed, pull out. So Mike took over as the acting captain in January, I believe it was, when a vacancy occurred, and has been that acting captain position until we conducted a process to determine to fill the position. We had several applicants from around the country. We narrowed it down to 2, and really then Mike just stood out with his dedication and years of service here, and Mike was chosen for this position, and I think it was a good choice. And Mike has lots to learn, like we all do, but he also has a lot to give and bring to the position. So we're going to recognize Mike today, even though he's been wearing the badge for almost a month in an official capacity. And I'll go through the oath of office with Mike, and this is one where you always do it, and we always mess it up, but we're going to give it a try again. And then a small presentation, and then Mike's family is here, and his wife Tracy will pin the badge officially on him today. So I guess we're supposed to step out in front, I've been told, or I'm going to get in trouble, so we're going to do that. I've also got law enforcement code of ethics. We're not going to go through that, but it's attached to Mike's packet. And this is not just for a captain position. This is something that all law enforcement officers review and go through during basic academy. And it's a document. It varies a little bit throughout the United States, but it essentially says the same. And it really has a big community component to it and a lot of ethical stuff. But we'll go through the swearing in. So Mike Bailey, if you'll raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Michael Bailey, do solemnly swear.
I, Michael Bailey, do solemnly swear.
That I am a citizen of the United States and the state of Washington.
That I am a citizen of the United States and the state of Washington.
And that I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States.
I will support the Constitution and the laws of the United States.
The Constitution and laws of the state of Washington.
Constitution and the laws of the state of Washington.
And the ordinances of the city of Oak Harbor.
And the ordinances of the city of Oak Harbor.
And that I will, to the best of my judgment, skill and ability.
And I will, to the best of my judgment, skill and ability.
Truly and faithfully, diligently and impartially.
Truly, faithfully, diligently, and impartially.
Nicely done. Perform the duties of captain.
Perform the duties of captain.
For the Oak Harbor Police Department.
For the Oak Harbor Police Department.
And the city of Oak Harbor, Washington.
And the city of Oak Harbor, Washington.
As such duties are prescribed by law and ordinance.
As such duties are prescribed by
law and ordinance.
law and ordinance.
And I further swear.
And I further swear.
That I shall diligently and faithfully.
Shall diligently and faithfully
Carry out the lawful directives.
Carry out the lawful directives.
Of the duly constituted authorities.
The duly constituted authorities.
For the city of Oak Harbor.
For the city of Oak Harbor.
And that I shall abide by.
And I shall abide by.
Conduct rules of law enforcement code of ethics. So help me God.
Conduct rules of law enforcement. So help me God.
Excellent. Very well done. Almost got through that without a lot of errors. So, and I'm going to present to Mike. We have a certificate of promotion. Mike, you want to step up? A certificate of promotion for Mike, memorializing the day. Apply for him to put on his wall with the other ones, or if not, start a lot more. And so Mike is being officially recognized and promoted to the position of captain of our department. So I'll give this to Mike, and then we'll call his wife up, Tracy, and she'll pin the badge on. Hopefully, no blood. That works. Okay, so I'm going to let Mike introduce the rest of his family that's here.
Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity. Just like to give some recognition to my family. First off, my wife. Been married for, oh crud. I just put myself on the spot, but it's going on 26 years. My two sons, Brandon and Dylan, both graduated from Oak Harbor High School. It's not easy being married to a law enforcement officer, middle of the night getting calls and got to go and stuff like that. But they always brought me back to being a dad and being a husband first, which was very important for me in my entire career. My mom, Linda, my dad, Tom, and my two nieces, and my stepmom, Kathy, they came to see this presentation tonight, so I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain.
Oh.
So Mike had some prearranged things for a couple weeks. I tried to get him canceled, but he's not, so I guess he's going to do it anyways. But I look forward to working with Mike. I've enjoyed my time so far. I think he's interacting real well with the officers who all know him, and it's nice having that person with me who can help with that transitional stuff and have that knowledge of the department. He's got a lot of outreach to the community, and because of his time here, so it's great to have. So, did you guys want to do your thing?
Yes,
Are you coming down?
we're going to take a 5-minute recess and come down and congratulate our new captain.
We lost everybody. We lost everybody.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it hasn't been a full 5 minutes, but I'd like to reconvene the meeting in the interest of time. We are now at item number 3 on our agenda, citizen comment period. This is a time when citizens may comment on subjects of interest not listed on the agenda or items listed on the consent agenda. To ensure comments are recorded properly, please state your name clearly into the microphone. Please limit comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. Comments regarding candidates or ballot measures are not allowed under state law. Individuals participating in public comment are asked to refrain from speaking on these topics during the comment period. So with that, I will open up our citizen comment period. We lost most of our audience with that oath of office. So seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. We have items A through F on our consent agenda tonight. And yes, Councilor Wassinger.
Yes, I had a question on consent agenda item E, so I would move to pull consent agenda item E. I had a question on the warranty period.
Okay, this is the Clean Water Facility,
Yes.
Carollo Engineers.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, the other items will be approved as presented. That's A, B, C, D, and F. And we've got our engineer Brett Arvidsson coming to the podium. Did you want to do specific?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay.
So on task 400, the warranty period services, so I understand it's pretty basic 1-year warranty. What happens after that year? Are we going to have to pay every time the items listed we have to call the help desk, or there's a software upgrade to this system? I mean, how much does that cost, and how common is that going to happen to us after the warranty?
After the 1-year warranty, we'll be on a normal system, and we have, as an organization, decide how we want to, both with this system and the SCADA system. And we've got the SCADA system set up for 6 months after we start it up. Then we'll have to figure out an ongoing maintenance program for it, and software support and that sort of thing, which is something we have planned in our future budgets.
Oh, okay.
So it'll be a normal IT service. Like I say, if we get a new upgrade or if we bring new equipment in, we'll probably do that internally.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other satisfied?
So I have a question on that too while Brett is there. Brett, can you explain why on the budget this is being funded by our general budget and not from the project?
It's, we consider it to be an ongoing operations cost, and we decided it was best handled as an operations cost.
The question is why?
It's more of a service, I guess. It just seemed like the better idea at the time. So it wasn't really, there's not a whole lot of capitalization in it.
Okay. So, no other questions? Then we will consider that it's actually items A through G.
Yes.
I didn't turn my page on my agenda, so with no more questions, we will those will be approved as presented. Okay. And now we are on item number 5, Mayor, Council, and Staff comments. I wanted to make a couple of comments, actually. I attended National Night Out last night and would like to thank all staff and all departments that were involved in doing that. It's probably the best attended I've seen yet. I'm not sure about actual head counts, but it was really nice to see our people out there and our citizens asking questions. I saw some council involved, but we certainly had heavy involvement from our police and fire departments, and I know Public Works helped set that up, and it was a great night. So thank you very much. And in fact, our Councilor Heisen led it off with a wonderful song. I have, let me see, I have a couple of other things I'd like to talk about, and that we have a lot of employee recognitions during the month of August, and I thought that I would read those. Some actually choose to have a presentation. Once in a while we'll have some come to our council meeting, but we don't require that they do that, but I'd like to recognize them for their years of service, starting with Eric Hannon, 10 years, Tim Shelley, 30 years, Dan Martin, 15 years. Brian Bronstein, 15 years. Sir Lloyd Carter, 10 years. George Place, 20 years. Ken Riley, 10 years. Carl Syme, Sergeant Syme, 20 years. Michael Clements, 20 years. Patrick Horn, 20 years. Sandra Place, 20 years. Mike Engel, 20 years. Dina Nichols, 15 years. Alden Boone, 15 years. Jack Smith, 15 years. Kim Schmall, 10 years. Dina Emery, 10 years. Mike Buxton, 25 years. Thanks, Mike. Chris Sublett, 10 years, and Dr. Doug Merriman, 20 years. All celebrated, I think, this month. Or no, I'm wrong about that, but several of those were. But these are people who have gotten something for this year. So thank you to all of you. And with that, I think I will turn it to council for their comments. Any council comments? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to thank and commend Police Officer Esparza, who came to the rescue of an older lady in front of the City Hall on a Sunday morning on July 16. My wife and I just came from the church and saw this car stuck in front of the City Hall, dragging that barricade in the parking lot, and she dragged it about a couple of feet, 2 feet. So there was nobody else there, so I went to the police station and talked to his dispatcher. In less than 1 minute, 2 police cars came, and Police Officer Esparza and the other officer, I didn't get his name, made assessment of the situation. The chassis of the car got stuck on that barricade, you know, the one in front of the parking space. So he called a towing company, and Police Officer Esparza stayed with the lady until the car got off that parking lot. So I'd like to thank him for doing that. That's all.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilor Eisen.
Thank you. On that note, I'm just going to love on my city a little bit. I'm really impressed with the list of employees and their longevity. I think that when we read off lists like 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, that's a real testament to what it's like to work for the city. I mean, I don't think people would be sticking around for 25 years if they didn't enjoy working for the city. So somebody somewhere is doing something right. So whoever you are, thank you. And thank you to staff for sticking around. I think one of the things that makes our staff so knowledgeable and our customer service so exceptional is that longevity and that knowledge and that memory and that accumulation. So I'm really impressed. Thanks, guys. And I'm also really impressed by the camaraderie. Nikki and I were just talking about this. Whenever there is a what's the word I'm looking for? Thank you. Presentation. All of the law enforcement shows up. All of the fire shows up. All of the. I mean, the room is full. It's full of blue, and it doesn't matter what first responders are being recognized or why. And I just, when people are not even on duty and they show up just to be there, you know, in support, I just, again, I'm just really impressed, and I think that the camaraderie and the atmosphere and the family is it's just a beautiful thing. So anyway, I'm done being cheesy. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Heisen. You know, I thought about your wonderful national anthem song last night, and I thought about maybe you could start off our council meetings with that. Maybe every 2 weeks. Probably too much to ask. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll think about it
Make a
occasionally.
motion if we do that, we increase her pay.
Second. Or decrease.
Any other, yes, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of quick things. In case you hadn't looked outside, we've got a bit of an air quality issue. And starting tomorrow, Island County has imposed, they're calling it a type 2 burn ban. So traditionally, that would prohibit you from building larger fires, even with a permit. But now, not only can you not do that, but there's no recreational fires. So, and my kids have a little fire pit that they love, but that's off limits until the foreseen future. But you can still do, according to the bulletin they put out, barbecues, briquettes or propane, portable camp stoves or self-contained camp stoves, but no more recreational fires or burning of natural debris. And the other thing I wanted to touch base on, I was a captive audience in the dentist chair yesterday and had someone inquire about what do you do if, you know, you have a concern, or typically it's a complaint. And I've said this before, but if people don't know, and I didn't realize this, if you go inside of our utilities office, just to the left, there is a complaint form. There's also a link to that on the city's website. The lower right-hand corner, we've got a gray area that says links, and you can download the complaint form. And so whether it's an issue, well, probably any issue you could think of would be able to be put on that complaint form and then turned into City Hall, or you can always contact any one of your city council members. Thank you, Mayor. That's all.
Yes, thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay. We'll move on to City Administrator, Dr. Merriman.
I've got a couple items here to touch on first. And, thank you, Tim. You got the slides up. First is just our calendar looking forward for the rest of this month. In past years, August has been a one-meeting month, and just a reminder to everybody that our next meeting, we will have the second meeting this month, will be on August 15th at the normal time here. We did change to our June and July are the one-meeting months now, so we will be back to our regular schedule. On August 23rd, we'll have our workshop at 2 o'clock. One of the primary speakers I'm going to talk about for just a moment here is McGrath and Associates. They'll be here to talk about our compensation survey and how that's proceeding. And a couple other things that I have. One, if I've asked Nicole to give us a quick update on something that we're doing with the council meeting tonight.
Mayor, City Council, thank you, Dr. Merriman. Well, tonight we have something new and exciting to offer for our citizens. We are live on YouTube. We have an official YouTube channel. So we're delayed by a couple seconds, but this is a new and exciting thing. We are now able to offer something for our citizens that will be able to access on their Apple, their Kindle, their mobile device, pretty much any device you want. And we're also able to offer something that the City of Oak Harbor has never been able to offer, and we're able to offer closed captioning for our deaf and hearing impaired citizens. According to Island County Health, they say that 19% of the people in Island County are deaf or hearing impaired. So now the closed captioning option, if you go on the lower left-hand part of your screen, you can't do it live, but once you go back to the video, you can hit the closed captioning option and it will write the motion. The other really exciting thing about this is when Councilmember Almberg makes a motion, I'll be able to go back and do it verbatim. This is very exciting for us. By taking this step, we're able to save the city approximately $3,000 a year with our live stream capabilities and our rack space storage. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Without our amazing videographer, Tim, this wouldn't have happened. He has been instrumental in this process and implementing it. Also the help of the mayor's office. So we're really excited to be able to offer this to our citizens. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Thanks for the update on that. So a couple of things that I have. One is our classification study is coming up on August 23rd. And it's going to be a pretty technical discussion. The consultants who are using this go-round have a little bit different methodology. And I thought to help us to be a little more efficient on that workshop date, what I do is just throw some teasers out here. It's a little bit of information that gets us kind of using the same terminology and to understand what their methodology is. So when they get here on Wednesday of that week, we'll be a couple steps ahead as far as already knowing what their verbiage is and those things like that. So just for a couple minutes here real quick, I'm going to run through a couple of the items on the class and comp study so we know a little bit on what we're doing. So as you may know, the city has a salary grid, and we adopt this with our budget every 2 years. And what a grid does is it lays out the different salary levels and pay that we do for our city employees. And hopefully I can hit the right laser button here. Is the square button, Tim? Is that the... Oh, okay. And I see someone running out here. But as you can see down the left-hand side where it says Grid A, Grid B, Grid C, all those, thank you, Dennis, all those sides here, these are called different grid levels. And when we go across the top, horizontally, these are step levels here. So you may assign an employee to Grid B. We usually hire in on the lower end here, and each year they will go through a new step increase until they get to the top of their range. So that's how a grid works like that. And as I mentioned, we'll assign different employees based on the type of work they do and a lot of different rating criteria. For example, Grid B, just for example, we might have maintenance workers on Grid B. Accountants could be on Grid C, and you could have an attorney on Grid D. So these are called classifications. It won't be all the time just one specific employee, but a classification is a grouping of employees that have a similar job title and similar duties. So we'll assign those to the grids as shown on there. So what do we do in a compensation study? What things do we want to look at, and what do we need to know about it? When we're looking at our grid, we want to look at 2 places right off the bat. And the first is in the upper left corner, we'll call it entry level or the minimums. We want to look at that lower end of our salary grid to see, are we able to attract, or are we competing with other cities when we're looking at new hires? So you could, like I mentioned before, in the steps 1 or 2 on that, that's typically where we hire in. The second area we want to look at is the top of the range, and this is called the maximum. And the question we ask ourselves here is, can we retain seasoned employees? Is that upper range and what we're paying over the long term equivalent to our comparable cities? So that word compare is what you'll hear a lot. We base this on comparing ourselves to another pool of cities. And how that works is a compensation study is we'll select a pool of cities, and we call these comparables. We'll calculate market averages for those different employee classifications. We'll look at similar classifications at other cities. We determine a market average then for that classification. And step 3, we have compare market averages to our own grid to see how it is. And then what should be step 4 is we make adjustments to our grid if needed per our adopted policy. Now in our adopted policy, we'll have such things as where do we try to target in our market? Is it at the midpoint? Are there different things that we want to look at? So that's basically how we do that comparison. Now there are terms in this methodology we're going to be looking at later this month, terms to know and love, because these are going to be what we're going to have to be pretty conversant in. The first one is going to be comp ratio. We'll be hearing about this. And this is a measurement of where we stand compared to our comparable cities. In this case, 50% on a scale of 0 to 100, 50% means that classification is at market. It's the midpoint. And then I put a couple of examples. 70% means that position is over the market because it's over the 50%. Or 30%, the other direction, could mean that we're paying under market. It's below the 50%. That's what a comp ratio is. The second one is minimums. And what we're looking at there is I got to switch things here. The minimums is going to be looking at this lower end of the grid range like that. Steps 1 through 4 right in that area. And remember, that's what we're looking at is how well can we attract employees based on the minimum end of our salary grid. The next one is the word maximum. And this is where we get in that retaining area. This is up on the right end of that grid line. This shows where we compare with other cities on the upper end of our range. Now, one area I think is going to be a little confusing, just a heads up, there's different terminologies with different consulting groups. And McGrath sometimes can use the term market, and to us it might mean one thing, but to them it might mean another. This whole grid line in the upper right corner is called a market grid, and that's the market range for that classification. A lot of times I've noticed McGrath will use the term market, and what they mean by that is when you look at those comparable cities, the person in that grid line, all of them averaged together might be somewhere in the 4 to 5 range. That's just an example. And they'll call that market, and that's a little bit different than what we've called that in past studies before. And that can be a little bit confusing. But we'll let McGrath explain that a little bit more when they're here on the 23rd. Well, one thing I wanted to do just really quick is to show you a little bit about where we stand. We've done some early metrics on this, and what I want to talk about just for a quick second is what should things look like. And sometimes it's better to put them in graphs than a whole table of numbers to look at. And so I've come up with these a little bit to try to explain how these things work. This upper graph here, the first square one called optimal, this and this one below it, the market ranges, are if the city is optimal or if it's perfect, if we're perfectly on line with our market. And as you can see, the way that it's defined by our consultants is, remember the comp ratio, 50% is the average. Well, this grid here, you can see goes from 0 across the bottom to 100%. And what the consultants will say is you are within your market if you're within plus or minus 10%. That's this line here. So what we would look at here is you see the 50% line, that's pure market average right there. And where this blue box is, you can see it's plus or minus 10%, basically going from 40 to 60%. So that's what a perfect graph should look like if we're at optimal. And then when you look at our salary grids, what we would do is come up with a salary grid that's called market. It would look like this. And our city one should line up perfectly underneath it, meaning that we correspond from steps 1 through step 10 perfectly on market. So what I put that there is this is what we're trying to attain, is getting to that sense where everything's in equilibrium like that. So what happens? We can go ahead and do a salary survey, and it'll get us, and we can get ourselves calibrated right to market. But it's like other things. I remember one time a guy told me that as soon as you put a septic tank in, it starts to fail from the day you first starting to use it. And it's the same thing kind of with salary surveys as well. The market will start changing. Some positions will start being worth more than others. Some will change. So the grid that we had that might have been a perfectly aligned, it will start to change and flex over time. So this is what we're looking at today. In the upper left corner, I have our comp ratio box, and that's that optimal one that we have. This is what we're looking at today, the upper right corner. As you can see in our different classifications, we're a little bit skewed to the left, and we have a couple of classifications, I believe 3, that are skewed to the right. Does that mean we're underpaying? Does that mean we're overpaying? What it means is you have to do further analysis on that to know. We're a little bit skewed to the left on comp ratios, meaning we're probably a little bit lower than what our comparable cities are. When you see ones to the right, you need to look at how you are with other cities. And you also need to look and see, because sometimes not all positions are created equal. And when you're a smaller city, a lot of times people wear more than one hat. So we may have some pay difference because we may have some people working and doing what are 2 functions at another city. So our market might be a little bit higher to compensate. Okay, the other word we were talking about was minimum. And this is how we look here. Again, on that upper left corner, I show the optimal. Our minimum salary, the lower end of the range, how we're looking, you can see we have a big chunk that's skewed to the left, meaning our entry-level salaries are quite a little bit more heavily weighted towards that lower end. And we do have some on the upper end as well. And the question this brings up is right here in that lower left corner, are we being competitive? Because as we go out to hire, we've noticed over the last few years, to be competitive, we've had to hire in at steps 4 or 5 or 6, sometimes even higher, just to match what's out in the market. And what that shows us a little bit is that our entry-level salaries are lower than our comparables. And then finally, the last one is the maximum side. And this is where we talk about retaining. And as you can see, we have our optimal grid again, upper left. And our maximums here are somewhat skewed to the right, or left, excuse me. We do have some to the right as well. And why we want to pay attention to this is we want to know, are we competitive on that upper end of our scale? And that's what helps us retain our employees. So hopefully those graphics help understand those concepts a little bit, because those will be ones that we're going to be talking about a lot more. So for a date on your calendar, mark down August 23rd. This is at 2 o'clock, our regular meeting. McGrath will be here to present those study findings, and it'll be helpful for us to be familiar with the terms. So if you get a few minutes between now and then, I've emailed to you everybody this handout just this afternoon, and Emma and HR and I can answer any questions you might have. Please feel free to give us a call in the meantime if some of this needs a little more explanation. So, okay, the next item I have, as promised, we are bringing back the Whidbey Island Marathon end of event financials. And I printed off a copy for everybody of the financial statements in front of you. And just a brief rundown, and my apologies for the small font. There were a couple different things we wanted to do with the marathon. We talked about this at a workshop probably a good year ago on some of the changes we wanted to make on how we manage the marathon. And we wanted to take a little bit more of a business approach to it and really get into the analytics of it to see what we can do to turn the marathon around economically and still maintain a really good event for everyone. On the handout I gave you, there are two columns that have a date on the top of them. One is 2016 and one is 2017. Those are the actual numbers, financial numbers for the events for this last 2 years. And as you can see at the very bottom of those columns, in 2016, we lost about $31,000. This last year, we actually, right now, we have 2 invoices outstanding, still about $1,600. But right now, we're in the black about $12,000. So we did a really good turnaround on that. There are a couple things we did that brought this up. One is we consolidated the management of the event. And if you look down in the expenses area, you'll see under professional services, there's one called coordinator, and there's another one a little bit lower called event production. And what those are is we used to have our own internal race director, and we were hiring Orswell or someone else to do race production. And what we saw in there was some duplication in those functions. So the idea was, why don't we just contract out with a race production company, consolidate some of those costs, and just see what happens? So that's exactly what we did. Under the consolidating the management of the event, we merged the race director and the event production functions. We went out to RFP and we hired Orswell in to manage that for us. We did other things too. We moved researching of materials and acquisitions to the service provider. What that means, instead of having our own staff going out and pricing everything and trying to talk to vendors and do that, we got that included in that contract with the provider. They also focused on enhanced customer service. I don't know if you noticed this year, we really, at the race event, especially Nicole, I got to give her some kudos here, we had a lot of staff and a lot of people from Orswell out there really trying to make that a good experience for everyone. We coordinated, it should be race day needs agreements that were in place, and we met a lot of deadlines there. One of our big goals, thank you Rich Tiehouse, he really wanted this, was we opened the bridge, ran across it, closed the bridge, and had traffic going in 12 minutes. And we used to hear about this from DOT because it would take us an hour or so sometimes. In fact, it was 56 minutes last year. So they were able to really be efficient about closing the highway and getting across the bridge. We did want to cut down on staff time, which you can't eliminate it because a lot of staff are still needed on the race day event for barricading and traffic and safety and those things. But we're able to do some. In fact, one other measurement we had in previous years, we usually ran about 500 volunteers to pull off the event. This year we ran about 250. So that just made it a lot logistically easier to handle and do that. And we had a lot of helpful people that really make that event pull off. The other area that we emphasized on was pricing of entry fees. Now, I could really get statistically geeky on you on this one, on how we did that. But it's called multiple linear regression. And what you can do is go back over a few years, lay out your fees and how many people came, and there's numbers you can crunch and do that. And it'll tell you which of your races and the prices for each one are the most sensitive to change. So I was able to go back and look at that, and we determined that the half marathon is the one that's the most, makes the most money for the city. But when you change it, it was the most sensitive to change. So we were able to look at those sensitivity lines like that and actually reprice and recalibrate how we did the pricing model. And sometimes it looks strange when you do that in 1 year, but it really, I think, paid off for us because we were really able to price that and make that work. Excuse me. A couple other things we did. We offered an incentive for early registration, our early bird discount. We remodeled that this year. In fact, we had actually quite a few participants even before December 31st. Which helped us because then we actually had registration fees to handle our cash flow, which then lets us order things early and take care of discounts and things like that. So that really helped. And there's a couple other items there as well. One of the things we did, we used local flavor whenever we could. We wanted to make sure people in the community were able to get out there and be visible at the event and advertise. One example was our prizes. We had Whidbey Island Rocks. Actually did a lot of those and was able to hand those out to people. So that was pretty fun. And these really quick, marketing was the big change we did this year. Orswell Events was very good on this. We really increased our social media presence, and that's using Facebook and other different avenues like that, try to get that information out there. The hiring the service provider, Orswell had a database of about 50,000 runners that had signed up for other running events around Washington. And we were able to email burst out to those different groups to try to get our information out there. We had advanced releases of our shirt and medal design because we wanted to generate that I gotta have it mentality out there with people because they would see that and get excited about it. And of course we ran with the Salish running again. I kind of already talked about acquisition a little bit there. We did a lot of advanced planning and did a lot of things, especially Nicole did, to make sure we weren't overbuying. As you know, we just passed we took a council action recently where we surplused thousands of shirts that were overbought. So what we're trying to do is be a little bit smarter in how we buy and make sure we don't end up with boxes and boxes of leftover shirts. So, and then the last item, this is where you and many others came in. We had visibility, and we asked a lot of local officials, our leadership positions, and our local celebrities to come down and help out. Whether they were announcers, they were handing out goods and services during the event, or handing out medals. That was all very helpful, and it really got a good sense of community connectedness with that. So those are the main goals that we wanted to accomplish, and I think we did a great job at getting there. We could probably put a check mark on each of these. There are a lot of people that still did work on this. You know, I've mentioned Nicole and Rich, and there are countless others through our volunteers and city staff that did help with this. So it came out with a good event. And we were able to do it. We increased our participation in the event by 30%, or excuse me, about 28%, right in there. Our revenues were up about 17, 18%. And at the same time, we dropped our expenditures down about 17%. So when you add all that up, all came together. We were able to at least be in the black this year and kind of get that turned around. So that was, we felt that was pretty successful. Going forward, right now, we're talking with Orswell again. They did have an extension provision in their contract. So we're talking to them about that and already making plans for next year. So that's what I have for my things. Do you have any questions or anything I can answer on this?
Councilor Heisen?
Thank you, Mayor. You say you're talking to Orswell about that. Are they interested in continuing?
Yes.
Okay.
There.
Yes, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. A couple things, well, three things. On here, a line item for photography. I thought we had a sponsor in some way for the photography that was taking place.
Do you want to hit that one, Nicole? Is it $2,600? Is that the...
Hey, thank you, Councilmember Servadius. On this particular line item, I believe that if you look up to the top, it'll also come out as sponsors. So we do have to account for it in our budget that it was spent, but then our sponsorships paid back for it. I think the sponsorship from Brandman University was for $2,000. $600, I believe that was, you're calling me on the spot here. I think it was for fees that we had to put in place for some of the expo photography that we had to do and some of the on-site photography that we had to do at the finish line.
So is Brandman under other local vendors? Where is Brandman then?
Yes, sir. Other local vendors,
Sorry.
contributions. 2,000 of that was from them.
Well, that doesn't work. Sorry, there's nothing in 2017 under other local.
We'll have to just.
Okay.
One thing to remember too, in-kind contributions don't show up on here. So there's some different things because it's not a cash outlay or inlay like that.
Right, I just want to see if we're expensing it, if we got a revenue to match it, or it's an expense.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other question was, and I don't know if we've done this in the past, you said we tried to reduce city staff time. Is there any accounting of city staff time in here?
No, there is no costing of city staff time on this.
Okay, so it's just a hope or a thought that it was reduced.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think just talking to everybody, it was pretty apparent that there was quite a bit of reduction in that.
All right, and the last thing, if you would, when you're done, will you make sure and hit the temp occupied button on the air conditioning as you go back?
Sure.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor.
I can do that.
Councilor Wassinger.
Yes. So hopefully this continues, and it continues with Orswell, and we continue to, as you say, be in the black and create a net income for the marathon. Is this a special, like a special fund in the general fund that this is kind of kept track of, and just for the, for our budgeting when we're going forward, looking at that next go round, and how are we going to see how that fund is doing?
It is. It's actually, we call it a management fund or sub-fund of the general fund.
Okay.
So when we go through the budget, we'll talk about it. It won't be a fund that stands out on its own, but we do account for everything separately in that sub-account, in that sub-fund.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Councilor, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to step back on the McGrath compensation survey. And you don't have to answer this question right now, but I would like for McGrath to be prepared for it during our workshop. And that is, why are we isolating the comparisons just to other cities rather than to the local market? For example, the city has employees, and I'm just going to use this as an example, in mechanics, vehicle mechanics. We have other private businesses in vehicle mechanics. Why aren't we including in the compensation survey what the market is outside of cities? If we keep doing a survey within a closed cell, we really don't get a really good market picture of what the comp is for our community.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It sure does.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I'll make sure they get that question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Council? Okay. Then we'll move on to clean water facility update. Okay.
Good evening. It's time for our clean water facility project update. We've been actually very busy in the last month. The structure is starting to come out of the ground, and we're starting to see our buildings actually appear. So in the background, you see our membrane building, and that's actually at the top of walls, so we're getting ready to put roofs on it. So that's coming along pretty good. And while the bricklaying is impressive, this has actually been my personally least favorite activity because I can't see out my window anymore. So I'm looking at CMU. This in front of us is where our administration building is going to be. That's what we call the moment frame, the shear frame for that. So that's actually a wood frame building, but we put a steel frame to hold it up. So anyway, bricklaying is going very, very quickly. They're about 3 weeks ahead of schedule. This is our aerial photo from June 29th. And one thing, look at these plans for years and years while we're developing. You get used to seeing drawings, and then all of a sudden you look at something that's for real. And we're actually looking at a drawing. We're actually looking at foundations on the ground. So right now we're seeing all of our buildings here. And it's, along the lower end there is our administration building, our biosolids building. Up on the left is actually the blower building and electrical area. And on the right is our headworks area. So we're actually getting a real life site plan going here. And this is actually in the last month progressed quite a bit beyond that. Design-wise, we're continuing work on the Windjammer 90% design documents. We did review the 60%, and we'll be talking a little more about that later. We are continuing work on our SCADA software development. We're hoping to have a working model that to start playing with at the end of September. The Arts Commission has been a little bit slow this summer because of the summer vacation. We hope to work with them a little more coming up in the coming weeks. Construction-wise, we're placing concrete. GMP number 7, which was our deep foundation work, is essentially complete. We're working quite a bit on what you call GMPs number 8 and number 10. We're about 76% on the concrete placement right now. We do remain ahead of schedule and below labor estimates. Continue backfilling around the structures as we go along. We're bringing it out of the ground. We are continuing construction activities for GMP number 9, which is mechanical electrical, and that's very busy right now. We have electricians, and the galleries are actually getting filled up with the pipes pretty quickly. Number 11 is actually the administration building, all the non-process facilities, which we're seeing, which is the brickwork, for example, is part of that. We're running over 90 workers on the site right now, and I think we'll be up to 100 in a week or two. Like I said, we're right now the big push is get the above ground masonry working and start getting some roofs on it. Funding wise, we're still awaiting word on our $29 million. It's still on the funding list, but with the lack of passing of the capital budget, we're still kind of dancing on that one. We're not sure what's happening. Windjammer Park, we are pursuing funding opportunities, but the lack of capital budget in the state is going to narrow our ability to chase some of those until we get that figured out. Major decisions, thank you for passing our asset management earlier. That was on the consent agenda, and a little later this meeting, Joe will be presenting the 60% Windjammer Park design. Schedule-wise, I keep on saying we're right on schedule, and we are. Like I say, it's getting real intense. A lot of things starting to come together. We have some like 26 contractors working on site right now, and all of them moving in the same place. Brian Shirley is doing a very magical job of keeping everybody moving in the same direction. I think it's more like keeping the herd heading west. 11 months to startup. That's a real date. Public outreach, of course. If you want to get hold of us, you can visit our website at oakharborcleanwater.org and call us at 914-7000 or our city extensions. Email us at treatmentplan@oakharbor.org. And our next drop-in community meeting is August 8th or by appointment. People seem to drop by anyway, and if somebody's around to talk to them, we will. Yes, sir.
Remind them on the phone number, they have to dial all 10 numbers now.
Yeah, 360. I'm always used to dialing. Anyway, any questions?
Yes, Councilor Olmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Could you clarify that 29 million? Was that a SRF for 2018?
Yes, SRF alone, yes.
18? That's
yes,
the application
18,
for
yes.
18,
Yeah.
okay. And then what is the progress to cost ratio? You usually throw that one out too.
We're running about, we're about 107% of plan and about 98% of cost. That's the last number I saw. GMP number 7, for example, did complete 3 months ahead of time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing no others, thank you. Nice report. Okay. I see our city attorney. Esparza. So are you making the presentation for Ordinance 1805?
Yes, sir.
So we are at public hearings and meetings. I will give you an opportunity from the public to come speak. Pretty much the same comments. Try to limit your time to 3 minutes, please. State your name clearly into the microphone. And again, we have this fairly new comments regarding candidates or ballot measures are not allowed under state law now. So individuals participating in public comment are asked to refrain from speaking on these topics during the comment period. So item number 6A is ordinance number 1805, amending Oak Harbor Municipal Code 612080, entitled Sale of Beer, Wine, and/or Liquors in City Parks. Our city attorney, Nikki Esparza.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. You may recall that back on June 28th, staff came and presented information to you all about streamlining our special event process. And that process has now been in place for a month. And we've already seen a lot of positive results thanks to a lot of hard work by Lisa Felix and Nikki Tesh. One of the things we talked about during that conversation was whether or not there was interest in changing the approval for alcohol sale and consumption in the park from a council approval process to an administrative process. And when we had that conversation, it did seem like there was interest in moving towards an administrative process. We haven't had any issues with alcohol sales in the park or consumption in the park as a result of the special events that have had alcohol. So I took into account your concerns about the appeal process and did confirm that there is an appeal process in Oak Harbor Municipal Code 5.50, which is the special event code, and took the liberty of drafting an ordinance that would convert the approval process for the sale of alcohol or consumption of alcohol in city parks to an administrative process rather than a council process. And again, if there is need to appeal, certainly an applicant can do so the same way an applicant would appeal the denial of a special event permit directly to the council under Chapter 550 of the Municipal Code. So if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know and I will step back and let public comment.
Okay, seeing, give the public a chance to come up to speak. And going once, twice, okay. Let's bring it back up to City Council. Any questions from City Council? Yes, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. Page 411 of our packet, you struck the section on adding additional, the City Council or City Administrator designee shall have the right to impose other additional conditions. Why would we strike that? Why would we not want the authority to, or is that in the permit somewhere else?
That's inherent in the special event permit process, okay. And so it seemed redundant to have that in there.
Okay, thank you.
Because a part of the special event permit process is the imposition of conditions of approval.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilor Heisen.
Thank you. Can you explain what the administrative process looks like? I mean, I understand they fill it out an application and then the ones that need to be approved come to us, but if someone were to have an event and they want that to happen and they fill out the application, like, what does that process look like?
So what the process looks like is an applicant fills out a special event permit application, and it starts with Lisa Felix down in Development Services. Mm-hmm. She takes in that application, and then she makes sure that the application is complete. And now with this process that Nicole and Lisa have created, it gets uploaded into agendas. And there are probably 25 or 30 different people that look at the special event application and recommend conditions of approval and talk about any concerns that each department might have, any special needs that each event might have, like for road closures, barricades, safety, other type of safety issues. And then those comments get put into agendas, and that's what is used to then create the conditions of approval. So after it's gone through 20, 30 people, a lot of people, and staff has met on the issue, then it gets approved using the comments that the various staff members have submitted. Did I do that right, Nicole? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering how it got all the eyes on it, because
we're using
there's-
agendas now
yeah, a
instead
lot
of
of
routing to
logistics.
each department like we used to.
Perfect.
So it's definitely, Lisa and Nicole have created some efficiencies by switching to the agendas process.
That's fantastic. And this might be a Nicole question, but is there anywhere that we can, some central location that staff or public could go that has a calendar of said special events? Anywhere, if there's a race happening this day or a picnic happening this day or a reunion, where she's smiling, is that is that a thing? Is that not a thing?
Councilmember Heisenheim, I'm happy you asked that question. Dr. Merriman has a new newsletter that is being sent out, and a featured portion of his newsletter is going to be events that are occurring in our neck of the woods, the date that it's occurring and the location that it's occurring, so that staff and city council can be aware of those events. Now, obviously, the Chamber of Commerce has a master list of the events that are held within the city, but not all of the special events that are on the Chamber of Commerce's calendar even apply to things that we do here. Our intention with this new process is to provide the best customer service for our events and for our applicants, to have successful events that draw people to Oak Harbor, because we want them to see why we love Oak Harbor so much. So, and we're accomplishing that very well.
They were hired for their psychic ability, right? Was that one of the requirements? Because that's perfect. That's awesome. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Yes, Councilor Servatius.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt ordinance number 1805.
Second.
We have a motion to adopt ordinance number 1805, motion by Servatius, second by Munns. Seeing no other, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And I must say that I was able to attend the department head meeting as usual on Monday when Nicole Tesh and Lisa Felix kind of rolled that out to the department heads, and they did a really nice job. I think there was, a great connection there going on, and an understanding now of how we're doing it and doing it differently, and nice job. So thank you to all. Okay, next item is item number 6B, Mangat, intent to commence annexation proceedings. We have our senior planner, Dennis Lefebvre, with us.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I am here to present a notice of intent to commence annexation proceedings that the Development Services Department received back in June. General vicinity of this annexation is located to the north of the city. It's bordered by the Gun Club Road corridor to the west, and then the Oak Harbor Road corridor to the west, and the Gun Club Road corridor to the east. It is adjacent to the city corporate limits. The proposed annexation is within this circle. The corporate limits exist to the north, and it would butt up to the corporate limits on the east side of the annexation. And yes, the name should ring a bell because they did submit a notice of intent to commence annexation proceedings back in 2014. The first step for that proceeding was approved by the council to move to a further analysis of the annexation, which was subsequently denied in 2015. The agenda bill for both the intent and the agenda bill for the action are included as part of your packet items for tonight, so you can kind of look to see what the history of this annexation was. But regardless, this is a new notice of intent. The intent is to annex the 3 properties owned by the Mangats. Again, this is Oak Harbor Road on the west side. The 3 properties total approximately 19.12 acres. Staff did look at the gap that those 3 properties created and would be also recommending to the council to add those 2 acres, which total approximately 2.46 acres. And the proposed geographic scope is identical to what we presented to you back in the original notice of intent back in 2014, the 3 parcels plus the 2 parcels. As far as process goes, we are following 35A14, which is in RCW. It guides us through the direct petition method. We are going to be analyzing our comprehensive plan policies for annexation, which was also done in the previous application. The letter of intent needed to be submitted by representatives of 10% of the assessed value of the proposed area. This is well established with the Mangat's property. And then the council must review within the first 60 days of receiving this intent to basically decide upon these 3 decision points. We received the notice of intent on June 12th, so we are within that 60 days. The 3 decision points which we are going to discuss tonight, and council hopefully will make a recommendation to staff on whether to move forward, is to accept the annexation as proposed. You have your option to geographically modify the annexation, or you can outright reject the annexation with no threat of appeal by the applicants. The second decision point tonight will be to accept a proposed zoning for the geographic area, and we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. And then the third is to ensure that the proposed annexation area would assume their proportionate share of city indebtedness. Now, as far as geographic scope, we already identified what staff is proposing. The applicant came in with the 3 parcels, which are the crossed hatch in red. Staff would recommend to council to increase that geographic scope to include the cross hatch in yellow, which are 2 parcels, just to square off the boundary on the west side, primarily. And again, you have the option at this point in time to decrease that scope or reject the annexation totally. The next step that we will be looking at is assumption, or actually the adoption of the zoning. The upper portion in crosshatch yellow is in the zone we call PRE. It's the planned residential estates. It's a little lower density than we're used to seeing in urban setting. It's simply because with the residential modifications and the way we wanted to deal with the Naval Air Station and the noise factor that occurs up in that area, we wanted to keep the density fairly low. That was actually identified in our 1995 comprehensive plan. The lower parcel is in the planned industrial park zone. We would recommend that that be the zoning assigned to that parcel. And of course, then the last question that we would need to entertain is to have those parcels share their city indebtedness, and that would be pretty much a standard procedure. So with that, considering that this is a new intent to commence annexation proceedings, staff is recommending that we do move it past this point and give us an opportunity to review it again. There's been a couple of years since the last application that we received from the Mangats. For due diligence, it would be an opportunity to see if anything might have changed, if there's some additional plans that we would need to incorporate into our infrastructure planning, if there's any types of service differences that existed from the last time, we would need to incorporate that into our recommendation after this point. So with that, I'd be happy to respond to any questions that you might have on this intent at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Lefebvre. Let's see if the public has any comment first. Okay, seeing none. Councilor Heisen.
I just have one question. Oh, and a comment that the thoroughness with which the information was put in our agenda packets is fantastic. So thanks for that. And my question is, in terms of the recommended action, would you require 3 motions, or would it be appropriate, hypothetically, for me to make a motion to proceed with the recommended action as presented?
I think all three actions could be included in the same motion.
Or does that have to be 3 motions?
The actions are 3 different things, so.
The 3 decisions
Right.
are dealt with in the same motion.
But can we do that?
So I'm not sure I'm understanding fully what the question is.
If I were to move to proceed with the recommended action as presented, period, would that be an acceptable motion, or do we need to make 3 separate motions and actually read that verbatim?
Since it's on the screen, then it would probably be acceptable to just proceed that way.
That was my question.
Any other questions? Councillor Wassinger.
Yes, I have a question on the zoning. Now, I know we recently, not a zoning expert, changed where it was a little easier to categorize the zoning categories. I don't mean to sound redundant when I say that, as I say it. So that you could have different levels of, say, residential zoning or different levels of density zone. You know, how would that shake out with these zonings? So, because I don't quite understand the residential part, the yellow. What?
Right. Well, this is actually a fairly unique situation,
Okay.
because in our comprehensive plan, this is a standalone land use category, simply because of the low density. But I think, well, the next 3 residential zones are combined for the comp plan land use designation. So I think that's what you're referring to. This is a standalone area to the north of the city, simply because of the impacts of the air station. So we needed to keep the densities for residential low.
Okay.
In fact, there are very few areas that carry the PRE land use category and zoning, so it's kind of a one-to-one for that category.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Servadius.
Thank you. You may have answered it in the last slide there, Mr. Lefevre, as to why you would want us to move forward with this. The question when I read this was, what has really changed? It doesn't appear on the surface anything has, correct?
On the surface, it doesn't, and I agree with you. However, I think from our standpoint, to represent the due diligence to the applicant, to do a further analysis to make sure that nothing has changed,
Okay.
and to ensure that we've used all the tools in our toolbox to address the issues have been utilized.
All right. And on page 426, it's left over, or it's noted during the 8/6/24 meeting, that if the council rejects the petition request, there would be no further discussion in the near future about whether to annex the subject properties, which is what you imply up there. You said increase the scope, decrease the scope, or reject, and there's no appeal. If we went through this a little over, well, let's call it 2 years all round, if there is no discussion in the near future, what is that timeline? I mean, aren't we basically going through an appeal process in essence, 2 years later?
You mean as far as from the original intent to this application?
Right. If it's on the surface, if nothing has changed, I'm just curious what, if we didn't, there's no appeal process when it was rejected then, what is the timeline? Is there any kind of statute that limits?
Well, technically, that was on the second phase of that application. They went through the notice of intent, where there is no appeal process for the applicant, but that was approved by the council. So the second phase actually is appealable by the applicant on the decision of the council, which was not appealed. There is no time limitations between submittal of intent for commencing an annexation proceeding by the same applicants that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So the 2-year time frame is basically irrelevant.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, if we look at, and I wasn't familiar with the planned residential estate, less than 3 dwelling units per acre, I appreciate the noise concern, but we keep talking about ways to increase density, and I guess maybe we'll look at this if we move forward with this. Could we require, I mean, you're making that recommendation of zoning, could the council require traditional R1, R2, R3 zoning to get that area more dense, or would we never go that route because of its proximity north?
I think that brings up a little bit of a history with the Naval Air Station that I'm not aware of, and Steve is standing in the wings to address that, but I think there's some coordinated work in our planning efforts with the base on keeping our residential low above 16th Avenue, basically. This represents one of those rare residential areas that occurs north of 16th Avenue, but our intent is to keep the density low to basically be consistent with the requirements of the base.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilor Umber.
Thank you, Mayor. Question I have for you, and it may also be for legal. We have the annexation potential. We also have two zoning issues with PRE and PIP. And in the middle of dividing PRE and PIP, we have a future gun club road, which is part of our mapping for our comp plan. And we also have a requirement for due street frontage improvements. Now, I recognize that at the time of development applications for this property, they will submit a plan. At this particular point, should we identify that as a requirement or as a condition of these zoning actions, that those street frontage improvements from Old Oak Harbor Road to their property terminates, it looks like Goldie Road, that street be improved all the way through?
I think one of the tools that I referred to earlier involved looking at the potential of preparing a development agreement, which may have the opportunity to address that very fact. The road improvements or extension of that, utilities, potentially levels of service with our police and fire departments.
You said may have the opportunity.
Would have the opportunity.
And it would be a requirement based on our current ordinance for doing street frontage improvements.
Yes, if we felt that the potential development of those parcels would impact and require the improvement of that road, yes, we would include that in the development agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Campbell.
Thank you. Will this come back to us again?
Yes.
Why? Why is it here now then, if there are still issues that need to be resolved before we can go full bag into it?
I can't really answer that, although I know we received the notice of intent to commence annexation proceedings by RCW. We need to proceed with that and bring it forth within 60 days. We do know some of the issues that were involved with this process a couple of years ago. They were well documented.
Yeah.
We probably still have a lot of those similar issues that we're dealing with this time. But we wanted to take an opportunity and just do some due diligence for the applicant and readdress those issues to make sure they still exist.
Okay. I'm confused, but that's okay.
I think the shorter answer to your, that was a really complete answer, Dennis, but the real short answer is that by law, we're required to bring it to the council within 60 days of receiving it.
And we're doing that now?
We're doing that now.
Yes.
And so, and but the first step.
But we've done that before.
We have, and the council then at the subsequent public hearing, upon staff's recommendation, denied the annexation. So then that application dies. 2 years' time elapsed. They've come back with a new application. Again, by law, staff is obligated to bring it to you within 60 days to decide whether you want it to proceed or not.
I got it now. Thank you.
Councilor Munns.
Thank you. This may be a Mr. Powers question. I'm not sure. So, Mr. Lefevre referred to the proximity to the base. I know that there are certain noise zone, crash zone areas for building, and you're talking about residential. So, we have to be very sensitive with it just because. Do we do things like require extra installation or triple pane windows if they're in a certain noise zone, or is that up to the person building the house?
So couple of pieces that might be helpful for that question, as well as maybe some of the other questions that the council was asking relative to this. And again, Dennis covered this at the beginning. There's a certain area within our urban growth area that was designated as planned residential estate in 1995 with the original comprehensive plan. It was to reflect the low-density residential that was in this vicinity. This is the only place in town, so to speak, that we could say that you see this designation. So that designation's been around for quite some time. That's big point number one. Big point number two, north of the Northeast 16th Avenue alignment, the council has a very firm policy, and in some places it's actually part of our code. We're not going to establish any new residential, okay? Third part of the answer is yes, already within our building code, which incorporates noise standards, anytime we're talking about new construction or certain kinds of replacement construction, you're going to provide those noise attenuation features. As a footnote to that, the Washington State Energy Code is now such that by meeting the Washington State Energy Code, you meet or exceed the noise attenuation standards. But I think the real key here is that we're in a situation where if it's annexed, what you're really talking about are non-conforming uses by way of density. There are more units there, as you saw from those past agenda bills, than what the zoning would otherwise support. So we would not anticipate under our current code structure that there'd be an opportunity to build any new units. We'd be dealing solely with the repair and maintenance of the existing units, and then thresholds you might get into providing those features. So kind of a long-winded answer, but it kind of all builds on itself to say we're not going to see any new units built out there. We're not going to be able to increase the density, Mr. Servadius, because of that zoning, which is directly tied to our joint planning with the county and the Navy relative to encroachment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This request for annexation comes back to the council. The first time it came to the council denied the application. Now it's coming back to us, and it seems to me that the problems still exist, significant problems that will create burden to the current ratepayers, to the citizens of Oak Harbor. So this annexation seems to me that to be a burden to the current ratepayers. Now, if the proceeding goes with this annexation, will there be assurance that the city will have regulations, that the proponent will have their fair share to pay for any upgrades in there, like putting up a new lift station, upgrading the streets, putting more fire hydrants?
Absolutely.
What kind of assurance that the city has?
We would craft something, if possible, to address all of the issues that were outstanding from the last proceedings, or else we would come back with the same recommendation if we could not resolve those issues to the benefit and welfare of our citizens.
So this proceeding for annexation will go, and then those problems will be addressed after this council approval?
Ideally, yes.
I think Mr. Powers.
Do you mind if I take on? So 2 years ago, the staff eventually ended up telling you that the annexation was ahead of its time, right? That we didn't see how the infrastructure issues that the council's talking about could be solved. We recommended that you not approve it at that second step of the process, the public hearing process, and you accepted that recommendation. 2 years have passed. We think that, you know, in terms of making sure that we're doing our due diligence and giving the applicant an opportunity, we've suggested to you that you could allow it to go beyond this stage into the full analysis stage. If the council is uncomfortable with that prospect and just believes that this annexation is still ahead of its time or it's premature, your action then this evening would be to say, no, you don't want it to proceed, and then we're done. And then we won't do the analysis and we won't schedule it for a public hearing. We've erred on the side of being conservative, But if the council believes that there are still insurmountable issues at this point in time, it's completely within your discretion, rather, to just merely say that you're not going to allow it to go forward. And then we're done with the application.
I have a follow-up question. The second question is on the, in our comprehensive plan, there's a policy that we should, as much as possible, prevent the creation of enclave. Now, this property is on the north side and will surely create an enclave on this side of that. Why is staff making a recommendation when to create an enclave?
If I could, Mr. Bergal, using the screen behind Dr. Merriman, there still is this gap area. So the area which is just the aerial photograph without the color on it is still within the county. And so while this adds a piece to the finger that is the city, it's not actually creating a fully enclosed enclave. Now, but that's also why we've suggested to you that this property in the middle be included. That you, if you go forward, you should expand the geographic boundaries of the annexation so that we don't end up with a partial enclave. So the applicant only proposed these pieces here, and this middle rectangle was not part of their proposal, and we're suggesting to you that if you proceed, you should include that so that you don't create that partial enclave. But on the whole, there's still a peninsula, for lack of a better word, of county land there.
How about some follow-up here? Mr. Armberg showing me illustration here that small property right in the middle of that property will be included as a modification to the geographic location?
Correct. Yeah, that is what our recommendation is that you geographically modify the boundaries of the proposed annexation to include it. And that's important because that has to be done at this first step. If the council is going to move forward with an area that's larger than what the applicant proposes, you need to make that decision at the first meeting, at this meeting. You can always make it smaller, but you can't make it bigger once we start.
Thank you.
That's all. Councilor Olmberg.
I have a follow-up question also. Are any structures on this subject properties connected to city sewer right now? And when we go through, if we approve an annexation, they will have to hook up to the city at some point, even if their septics fail. Is that correct?
Yes, to both.
So for public health and safety, if there, and I'm just saying, if there are failed septic systems in that area, it will actually improve public health and safety if the property owners then put in a system that connects to the city treatment plant.
That's an accurate statement.
Okay. Thank you. With that, if there were no further, well, there's more questions.
Councilor Servadius. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Olmberg was heading down a path that I wanted to follow up on. So I know I toured that area with Chief Merrill at one point, just looking at all of our service areas. And it may have been clear out next to Oak Harbor Road. I know Mr. Buxton's here. There was a fire hydrant. So there aren't any, is there even city water in there? Or are there any city, there's no city services right now. So if this moved forward and we allowed it to continue the process towards annexation, can we make it a requirement? You said the answer is yes and yes, but more specifically, what would the timelines be that we as a city could mandate someone connects to water and sewer?
Well, I don't have a specific answer for that. I do know that there would be a health and fire safety issue because I think there's some water pressure issues, which would promulgate the need for water sooner than later, I'm sure. I mean, that would be a requirement.
So we've had some significant conversations at the staff level about those topics, Mr. Servadius, and maybe to Mr. Olmberg as well. As you know, by looking at your comprehensive plan, there's a number of policies in there that talk about annexation should not diminish our adopted levels of service, that annexed properties need to meet all the appropriate life, health, and safety standards. And so that's the litmus test that we'd want to apply. The key here from our perspective at the staff is that there's no way that we would want to recommend annexation to you if we believe that we would burden the ratepayers with significant infrastructure improvements, or through inaction, somehow the city is on the part of the applicant, the city is asked to take action. And so that's where we will be exploring the use of the development agreement as a tool, a contractual obligation between the applicant and the city. And quite frankly, that may still not solve the issues. And so those are the types of things that we've been rolling around at the staff level for the last couple of weeks. But 60 days isn't a lot of time to get those things figured out by the time we get it and get things into the queue. So that was part of the reason why we've recommended to you that you allow it to go past this stage this evening. So it gives us more time to really figure out, can we put together something that has some teeth? If the answer to that is yes, and you have a willing applicant, then maybe we can move forward. If the answer to that is no, then in all likelihood our recommendation to you at your public hearing will be that you don't approve the annexation.
Okay, and last thing. We don't know, but in theory, the Mangats could be planning to, whether we require it or not, make some of these developments, still staying within the zoning requirements of the PRE. Might it be possible that they are looking to improve the infrastructure and redevelop some of this?
It's possible they're looking to connect. We have some understanding that they're interested in sewer. Obviously, there's a reason behind the annexation. Dennis is coordinating with them, trying to get some additional information that will help us and then help you. The redevelopment part of it becomes very tricky, and we want to be really clear about that. The PRE isn't going to allow them to get any additional units, so then it would take a comprehensive plan amendment to change that land use designation to something else, where potentially you have redevelopment, a redevelopment future for that property. In the meantime, you're still going to be carrying the cost of that infrastructure improvements in order to connect it to the city services. So it's a rather complicated problem. But I think that's where we are in terms of our understanding at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Munns?
Mr. Powers and the staff, I appreciate you doing due diligence, but I would hope that I see the city more as customer service. And it's, instead of, no, you can't do that, it's, okay, how can we make this work? Now, we may end up with all walls and you can't, but I think we need to err on how can we make this work and see if there's a way to do that. I think sometimes we don't mean to, but it comes across as we're just saying no, 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 no. And so I am glad that this, in a way, is coming back. I like how it's squared off so we don't have an enclave. It kind of makes that corner nice and neat and very logical. And obviously, they want to if they're coming back again 2 years later to get something accomplished. So I appreciate the staff and you taking a new look at it. Yes, there are some problems there, but maybe there's a new way to look at it, and things have changed in that 2 years, give or take, good or bad. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Councilor Ellenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I personally think that the staff recommendation actually has the potential of improving this area on the long term and without a burden on the city. And therefore, I'd like to make a motion that we accept a modified geographic scope as proposed in Attachment 1, require the simultaneous zoning of the proposed annexation area as planned residential estate, also known as PRE, and the planned industrial park, also identified as PIP, and require the annexed properties to assume proportionate share of the city's indebtedness.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion pretty darn close to what is up there, and it's exactly like our recommended action in our council packet. Motion by Ellenberg, second by Munns. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously.
Thank you, Council.
Okay.
Mayor Severance,
Yes.
could staff request a 5-minute recess?
Yes. We will recess for 5 minutes. Our meeting, after our 5-minute break, I'll reconvene our regular council meeting August 2nd. And we are now starting on 6C, Resolution 1714, amending Schedule E, Oak Harbor Police Department Master Fee Schedule, and Addendum 1, Public Records Fee Schedule. And I see we have our city attorney back.
Thank you, Mayor.
Nikki Esparza.
City Council. This may seem rather strange to you, given that this is under public hearings. However, there have been changes recently to the Public Records Act, one of which requires us to hold a public hearing anytime we are going to amend our public records fee schedule. And since this resolution encompasses both a change to the police department's master fee schedule and the public records fee schedule, we're required to now hold a public hearing for that. You all are used to seeing fee schedule changes on the consent agenda, but times have changed. So the changes to the master fee, or to this fee schedule, include pulling certain things off the police department's fee schedule that properly belong on the public records fee schedule. We should have one consistent fee schedule for public records for all departments, and the police department had items listed that only belong on the Public Records Act fee schedule. So we're pulling those things off. We've also made some changes to the public records fee schedule that reflect changes in the law this last session. We are now allowed to charge for electronic transmission by volume, a certain amount per gigabyte. There's also a flat fee that is allowed now, $2, as long as we know it will go over that $2 mark if we want to use that. I don't anticipate that we will, because we do have a pretty comprehensive fee schedule, and so it's fairly easy for us to calculate the actual costs. And we've also made some changes to our most recent acquisition costs, most of which have actually gone down. Envelopes, I think, have gone down a little, but the bottom line is that we need to amend it to take into account the changes that have happened under state law, and also to pull out items from the police department schedule that don't belong under the police department schedule. With that, I will step away and let public comment.
Okay. So we'll have that public hearing and see if we've got anybody from the public who'd like to speak about it. Okay, seeing none. Council? Any questions? Any input? How about an action? There's Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. I move to approve resolution number 1714.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 1714. Motion by Servadius, second by Heisen. Any other? Okay, seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're moving right along now. We're to item number 7 on our agenda, ordinances and resolutions. Ordinance 1810, amending Oak Harbor Municipal Code, Chapter 1.14, regarding public records. That sounds familiar.
Still me.
Let's see how quick you can get through this one.
Okay, I will talk fast. So as I said, there have been changes to the Public Records Act, which include, the fact that we no longer have to respond to requests from bots. We can deny requests that are not for identifiable records, which now includes a request for all records that an agency possesses. We can now respond with a 5-day letter asking for clarification if it's entirely unclear, and that was a result of a terrible case that came out about a year or so ago. So we've also found ourselves in a position where we need to make changes to our public records code, the Oak Harbor Public Records Code. Some of the things that we're changing in this code, we've changed the contact person from the city clerk to a title called Public Records Officer. We're required under state law to designate a Public Records Officer, but we're not required in code to identify who that is. We can do that on our website. And since the city clerk, the person in the city clerk is now downstairs in my office as an assistant city attorney, and she is keeping the public records portion of the clerk's job, we've felt it important to redesignate the public records officer as just the public records officer. We're also adding in language to address the change in the law that allows us to ask for clarification as a proper 5-day response. We're adding in some required findings that talk about calculation of actual cost per page for scanning. We aren't required to put it in code, but we decided that that would be a good idea to put in code why we are not going to calculate the actual cost per page of scanning. And that is because we have so many departments in the city and everybody has a different hourly rate, and the cost of the scanners differs from department to department, and so it doesn't make any sense for us to calculate the actual cost in each given situation of the per page scanning. So we're adding in language in our code that talks about why we're not going to do that, and therefore we'll be using the statutory amounts. We also added in an additional payment method. Even though I think it's a given, it wasn't in our code that we can accept credit cards, which of course we can, and we added in some contact information for the utilities office where people can go to pay for their public records requests. Other than that, I think everything in the proposed ordinance is self-explanatory, and I would entertain any questions you might have.
Okay, give the public an opportunity here to, okay, seeing none. Back to council. Any questions? Any motions? Yes, Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. I move we adopt ordinance number 1810.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt ordinance number 1810. A motion and a second. Motion by Munn, second by Servadius. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. We are on to item number 8A, timekeeping system with Tyler Technology for Executime software. We have Patricia Soul, our
Thank you,
finance
Mayor.
director.
And council. So I'm here tonight to ask that the council approve the purchase of Executime and attendance software as proposed. The reasons that we would like you to do so, I will go through 4 questions. First question, why should the city move to an electronic timesheet system? First reason is greater efficiency. It removes the paper shuffle. It allows electronic recording of time daily, electronic approvals, electronic transfer of the time into the payroll system. Program and the data are all stored on the cloud. Time will no longer be estimated. It will be actual time. The planning side of it will allow departments to create schedules and shifts for staff. It would help the shift works, the staff that work shift work. It's customizable. It'll allow us to put union-specific or department-specific rules for pay into the system. Examples of departments that might be different would be police, fire, marina, public works. They all have union contracts, and some of them have different rules. Online requests for and approval for time off, no longer having to go through the process where it gets signed and sifts through the mail system. As soon as you approve the time, once it's submitted and approved, it automatically goes onto your timesheet. So it takes care of that piece too. It allows 3 different forms of entry. You can do time clock entry, you can do computer entry, or you can use mobile devices if we so choose. The second thing that's large is it is better tracking, and it allows reporting features on time, not just on the payroll. You can run reports on overtime and leave usage by employee, by department, by shift. You have a multitude of choices. You can view and print rosters daily. Customizable reports, there's a lot of them out there. I can't name them all. It allows the shift departments to post open positions for shifts. So if they have a shift opening, they can post it online and it'll automatically notify the staff that potentially could respond to that, and they can respond electronically. So it gives an ability for a lot more efficient use of the system. How did we choose Executime? We started out by looking at SHRM's website. That was done by our HR director. Society for Human Resource Management, sorry. 17 vendors were pulled that would qualify, that would actually merge with our system. We narrowed that down to 4 vendors that would actually fit a city of our size and meet the needs that we saw that would be there. The 4 that we narrowed down to were Kronos, Executime, ADP, and Ascentus. We established a small group that included the admin assistants from all the departments that do timesheets right now currently for their departments, HR, and finance. We as a group reviewed the material and participated in interactive product demonstrations from all 4 vendors. At the end of that, the small group narrowed our section down from 4 to 2, and that was ADP and Executime. We then took it to a large group, which included directors, supervisors, staff, and union representatives. We did another interactive product demonstration that was provided by both ADP and Executime. Executime was voted on and determined to be the top pick by the people at those meetings. The price of Executime, I looked at it from a financial perspective, was half the cost of ADP, and it was determined to be a much more user-friendly software. There's an ROI, return on investment, calculation that Executime did. If you want to look at your page 547 and see what they estimated, it was approximately $143,000 in savings, the way they looked at it. But some of the points they made were true. Or maybe all of them, but some of them I couldn't prove or disprove. What will change when we implement this? The first thing that will change is that paychecks will be issued 7 days after the pay period ending. So pay periods ending on the 15th and the end of the month, 30th or 31st, will be paid 7 days after that, or the last working day prior to that date. All employee pay will be on the same schedule. We won't have different shifts that are paid monthly. They'll be paid on the twice a month. We'll be requiring all employees to receive checks via direct deposit. We calculated there's only 12 checks a month that are printed on checks, and it will allow another internal control. We want to go live in 6 months if this request is approved. So we were hoping that March of 2018 would be the target go live date. That may change, but it will not be sooner. We want to give our employees at least 6 months to adapt for us to get the changes and get the system up to date. So all that would happen would be it would push it out further, not sooner. We're hoping we wouldn't have to push it out, but we wouldn't make it any sooner. And the final question is, what's the cost breakdown? On page 538 in your agenda packet, I break down the cost for you in a couple of ways. I look at the budget versus the actual cost and what adjustments will need to be made to people's budgets. We budgeted in the general fund $39,100 when we initially thought this was going to be more of a human resource tool versus a timesheet system. We morphed it into a timesheet system because that was the first thing we could accomplish across the city relatively easy. And so we're going to allocate those costs the same way we allocate our costs for our financial software. It's only $4,069.12, and that's including tax for 2017, more than we budgeted. So overall, it wasn't that much different than what we anticipated the cost to be. If you go down to the bottom part, the executive time and attendance breakdown, first year cost would include the implementation, the VPN device, and the annual fee, which brings before tax the cost to $39,714. Year 2 and year 3 support are at the $15,234, which our total contract will be signing as a 3-year contract for the $70,182. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, before we take it to council, I'll give the public an opportunity to. Okay, seeing none. Back to council. Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question. When you said that if there were shift time available that would be posted, then people just need to make a habit of going to their email to see what's posted?
It can actually send an alert to their phone, to their email, and alert on Executime. Whether or not they plan to use that, we don't know, but that is a feature that Executime has that's at no added cost. It would allow the shift to be, when they set up the shift, they can set up the shift, going forward, so they could plan a shift for 2 weeks, a month, a week, whatever they decide. And then if something happened in between, they could do this electronically versus having to call everyone. So it would have to be a decision by a department. It doesn't have to happen, but it's a feature that would definitely streamline that process.
Okay, thank you.
We have the money?
Yes, we actually, we're 4,000 less or more than what we anticipated in our budget. So as far...
It's not going to cause you any grief somewhere down the road?
No.
Thank you.
Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. Folks aren't actually, though, checking in on a time clock somehow, are they? Or might they if they're seasonal or?
Not yet, but some department heads have expressed an interest to having a time clock. For their users that don't access a computer very often, it might be more streamlined for them. If they use the time clock, they can check their time, they can record their time, they can even do leave requests on these time clocks. So they're more interactive than like a punch clock that you from the past.
Super. And I just want to say thank you. It was a nice presentation. We're
Thank
used
you.
to the agenda bill. And so the why are we doing it and how do we get here was a nice touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Heisen.
I agree with Councilmember Servadius. When you started, I made a note here when he's like, why are we interested in this? I wrote, because it's 2017. That's why. I work for the county and we have timesheets on Excel spreadsheets that we have to print out and fill out and sign, and our department head has to sign them, and they all go to our person, and then they, and it's just horrifying. It's really not efficient. So I'm very, very pleased that we're moving in this direction because it's 2017. So full support for me.
Councilor Olmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Will this system allow the supervisors to audit the time cards, so it is a tracking system that goes through supervisors, department heads, and up to the finance?
Yes, actually you can set up an approval queue. So immediately, of course, the employee would have to enter the time and approve their time. Then you can determine what level. Currently, the talk, we have, we'll finalize it as we start, if it's approved and we start using it. The next step would be probably an admin assistant, because currently they're the ones that are verifying the time before the supervisor sees them. So it could go to them, it could go to the supervisor, and it could even go up to the director level. And then when it's submitted over to payroll, we have a final chance to look at everything before it's actually approved. So we're auditing in the department as well as finance. So we're still taking a second look at things.
And then the next question is, does it track through our system for vacation time and sick time and all that kind of stuff? Is it a seamless system from beginning to end?
Yes, the way they describe it. We haven't used it yet, so I'm going to believe what they're telling us. What they're saying is we will take the data from Eden, export it into this Executime. That will include vacation, sick leave, comp time, anything that they've accrued. It'll go into Executime, and that's how every pay cycle, it'll go in there, Executime, time will be recorded, leave will be recorded, it will update that bank, and then it will export back in. So in Eden, a leave will be updated at the end of that pay cycle. And then the accrual will happen in Eden, it'll go back out to the Executime, and people will be able to put their time in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Servadius.
Just one last thought. We had a Granicus experience, and there's not a contract attached here. What is our out if this does not perform? We're gearing up to authorize staff to sign a 3-year contract. What protection do we have to terminate this? I'd like to know that before we... I totally support it, but we just had a Granicus experience, that's all I'll say.
Yeah, you know, it'd be like any of these type of contracts we get into, whether they're legally enforceable. You get in, there are certain deliverables that we expect to line out in that contract, and we would be able to enforce those on there. One of the things that you have some comfort in is the size of the company and their history and those things like that. So I know Patricia's done a lot of work looking at those and vetting that side out of it, so that risk level is pretty minimal. but there are agreements that are signed and things like that that will have performance deliverables in those.
And this software is owned by the same company that owns Eden. So they're going to want us to be satisfied because they get support every year from Eden from us. And this will be a complementary program. It's not Eden, but it's under the same umbrella company.
Anyone else? Okay, I would count, yes, Councilor Heisen.
I move to authorize staff to purchase and implement Executime and attendance software as proposed.
Second.
We've got a motion and 2 seconds to move to authorize staff to purchase and implement Executime time and attendance software as proposed. Motion by Heisen. I'll give the second to Campbell. Seeing no other questions, all in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. And we are on to our last, number 9A, Windjammer Park Phase 1, 60% design update. We have our city engineer, Joe Stoll, and looks like his backup, Brett Arvidsson.
Yeah, I brought my muscle with me today. Mayor and council members, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm hoping this is a fun conversation to have about where we're at with the Windjammer Park implementation, the first phase implementation. We've done a lot of work and I've got some fun graphics. However, I want to start out by reminding ourselves where we've come from. It's always good to kind of take a look back before you look forward. So I'm going to cover a few things, including, I guess my time's up. Some public involvement, get into the 60% design process, and then what are the next steps that we need to take. So we've been through a pretty extensive, I was looking at some of the dates, it's been over a year that we've been working on some of the parts of this. So we looked at old, the reason why we're even doing the Windjammer Park integration plan is it's a byproduct of the clean water facility, necessary for mitigation and restoration impacts of the treatment plant. But we wanted to take it a step further. And that's what we did with the integration plan. We took all those previous park plans that we've done in the past and we improved upon them. And this plan establishes the elements moving forward and the phases in which to implement them. So as part of that plan process, we put together a group of representatives from the community that we tried to get some people together that represented diverse aspects of the interests in the community. We had 5 meetings. 2 of those were public meetings where we invited the public to either sit in or comment at the tail end of the meetings. And then we had an online open house. And we had a really, really nice response. And that plan itself was adopted in June of 2016. What we heard, you've seen the slide probably a couple times by now, is that all the given elements, everything from restrooms to family friendly. Some of the key points is that the current RV park really doesn't meet current standards, and after a long deliberation we determined that it wasn't efficient use of the park space. And of course views of the water are important, no doubt, and the ball fields were another really good discussion point, and we did include that area, but of course we need to find another place for the ball fields before we do anything in that area. So this came out of the integration plan itself. That's kind of the 10,000 foot level of what we thought were some good ideas and elements for the park. We broke that into phases, what we thought would be attainable phases and phases that kind of made sense. And phase 1, well, clearly we had to do the work that's around the treatment plant, and we thought, well, that's kind of a strange place to stop. I wonder if we can do this. And so that's what we came back in November and asked for your approval to have Corollo help us do a design that covered that whole area. So the first phase, we're working on the design and first phase is design construction. It includes all the area outside the walls of the clean water facility, and we believe that it does a good job of incorporating the feedback that we heard from the community. Before we got too far into design, we met with the community again in January of 2017. And overall, we had 167 community members, either in person or in the online open house, comment on what they thought. And there's a report, if you're interested, on the project website where you can look and see your comment that you made, if you made one, and all the others, and a summary of those. But it largely mirrors what we saw from the initial effort. But more specifically, it focused on, you know, more of a natural and simplistic aesthetic, you know, nature play, things like that. You know, there was some representative imagery and some non-scientific voting that went on, and all those results are in the report online. So we came back to council in April of this year, and had a very lengthy resolution that adopted a whole bunch of different little finer points, which effectively authorized staff to move forward. 30% is the way to go. This is looking like we're on the right track. That allowed us to start chasing down permits and funding. And one of the key points to bring up, it actually came up earlier today, is that the RV park is it's in the resolution close on the 15th of October. So you may be hearing about that from constituents or the public in general, but that was part of this resolution, and it's necessary so that we can start doing these other fun things that we're planning to do. So what does the 60% look like? Well, this is it, and you're going to have other opportunities to see this in greater detail. I know it's on the overhead. This will be available online, and I can get you, email these to you as well later. I was madly putting this together at the last minute, so you can bear with me. But you can see this is just a nicer way of looking at the project as a whole. All the same elements are there, you know, just, and the laser is not working. But you can see the crescent-shaped parking lot off to the left, the little roundabout down near the bottom with a kitchen next to it, and a maintenance shack for all of the park's tools we'll need to maintain the park. And just north of the swimming lagoon, you can see there's a wetland area that we are using for restoration of some impacted wetlands. And then you can see the dark brown area is the new clean water facility. And just south of that, you'll see a plaza area. And actually, I'm going to go to the next slide and zoom in on that area a little bit more. And the trick with this one is they tripped me up and turned it 90 degrees to the left. So north is now off to the left, and the harbor's off to the right. So in the lower right corner, we have a splash park, and I have some renderings of that in a moment. A very decent-sized plaza area. We mapped out about how many tents we could get in there, and if you maximize the space, you could get anywhere from 80 to 100 tents in there. And that's without extending into the grass or into the parking lot. It's all on that. All in the plaza area itself, which I think is pretty cool. And you can see the parking area off to the left that kind of comes up to Pioneer Way. That's where the existing Whidbey Island Bank building is. So that's, as that goes away, you'll see it replaced with that parking lot. City Beach will also have some work done to it. You can see it doesn't go all the way down to the waterfront in this. It'll also, we've worked with a consultant to try, I don't know if you've even noticed this when you've gone down there and there's that detour sign when you're going down City Beach Street. Have you guys noticed how much better that intersection works just with that sign up? It's the simple things, I'm telling you. It's the simple things sometimes. So what we're looking for with that intersection is to have a concrete crosswalk there and make it look more like a park entrance and less like the third leg of an awkward intersection. So I'm hoping that helps with that intersection some, and we'll look to do some more things in the future with that. So let's look a little bit closer to Splash Park. This is where it gets fun. These are some representative images that we got from our consultant. You can see it follows that nature play theme. We heard from the groups that we wanted some different water features involved, water spraying up, water coming down on you, and if you look closely at the frame of a ship that's in the background, you can see water falling from the mast. And then the rocks are actually fake rocks, so that they're intended to hold up to the test of time. And actually, the logs that people are sitting on in there, they're fake logs, because we all know that we want this to last a long time. So they've got a product out there that's special for that. And then there's another view. This view is actually looking towards the marina. So you can kind of see from a different perspective kind of how the play area works. We're still working on the finer points of it. We've had some feedback from others. There's some ideas for some more, how are we going to make it interactive? If you walk past this part, it sprays at you if you touch this. They've talked about some other things like having elements that are kind of hidden. So like maybe a bronze starfish underneath a rock, and you may not see it the first time you visit, but as you play there more, you'll find more things. So they've got some really clever ideas. We've met with them several times on this, and we actually met with the gentleman that's doing the design on the spray elements is out of Bellingham. So all the valves and nozzles and things that create the water effects is somebody from Bellingham, and this is what they do. So the kitchen shelters, these are kind of fun actually. They took and they're still working on some different ideas, but there's 2 of them. You can see one at each end of the park, and this one is going to be the one, the smaller of the 2, and it's meant for one rentable space. You can see these are incomplete renderings, but I wanted to share them with you so that you could see where the concept was headed. They're kind of fun, I think. They provide, they put your back to the wind and provide shelter from the rain. They have a fireplace, an interior area to set up shop. We're looking at ways to increase the area of the interior to create more room to get out of the weather, or ways to shield people from the weather when they're using them. But it's it's a really fun way of doing it. And if you look at the overall map, the lower left shelter will actually have pinwheels coming off of it with different facilities as the plan develops. So when you rent the pavilion, or the kitchen, it feels like you're getting more than just a picnic table. You get an area to play too. So this is another fun one. This one's really crude. This is actually the engineering drawing, and I know the engineering drawings don't always show all that well on overheads, but I wanted to share it because it's kind of fun. You can see there's a covered area right there at the entrance to the park where that circle is. So you're coming into the park, and there's going to be a way to hold events under this pavilion that face either direction. So you could either have people seated on the area closer towards Beeksma, or you could have them seated in the grass looking from the other way as well. So it's open on both sides. So it has a lot of opportunities there, I think. And in the future, there's another stage actually planned for the east side, closer to where the lagoon is. There's another stage area planned for that location that's going to be a little bit more substantial. And that's a future phase. So this is a rendering looking back at the plaza area. I asked them to provide this because it's sometimes hard to get a scale of the size of things. So I asked them to put some people on there and show how wide that boardwalk is and how wide the plaza is. So you can kind of imagine what it is that we're looking forward to. So this is just representative samples of some of the site furnishings that we'll see. Some of the lighting elements, bike lockers, the benches. These are still being fine-tuned and worked through parks to make sure that we got just the right thing that's long-term maintainable for us. But a lot of fun elements in it. So just generic park access, the main entrance is going to be off of Beeksma. That's what we planned from the get-go. Secondary access to the park is going to be off of City Beach Street. And once again, once you get to where the tip of that arrow is, it actually feels like you're entering the park. And there's still plenty of areas for people to park at, to keep, to have access to the facilities. So how are we going to do this? So that's always the fun question. It's always fun to daydream, but now how do we do it? So the phase 1 cost estimate is right. It's hovering around $10 million. It's not new news. This is what we've been working with since we expanded the first phase. It's actually staying closer than I expected it to. We are working with Hoffman to prepare a more detailed cost estimate and help us work through how that breaks up between the clean water facility and other funds meaning grants and loans for grants for the splash park, RCO grants for recreation, possibly REIT money, service organizations. We do have some general fund money set aside for the project, but it's not quite enough to cover everything. So as we refine the cost of it, we're going to be enlisting some help from Nicole to apply for some grants and get things and I think we can do it. I think once people start getting excited about it and see what it is that we can do, that it'll work out wonderfully, and it'll actually draw the community in and have them be owners of it. So the next steps, we're going to put together a newsletter, and we'll be updating the website to reflect some of these images you just saw sooner than later. We'll have this all online so you can see what's going on with the project. We're meeting with the Parks Board to give them, I'm going to give them the exact same presentation I just gave you on the August 14th at their meeting. And then we have an open house tentatively scheduled for August 24th. I haven't talked to anybody else about this yet, so this is news to them. The intent is to have it here in council chambers. It's an opportunity for members of the public to come in after hours and take a look at take a closer look at the boards we have and talk with us about what they think. We're going to continue, as Brett has said, with the Arts Commission and make sure that that's incorporated into the project. And you'll be finding more information on this as we go, as always, in our weekly email updates. So as a whole, how are we going to keep this thing, more mechanics of it, of what's next with the park itself? We're continuing on the permitting process, as you can imagine, being near a shoreline, and with all the other things that go along with permitting, we've got some work to do. We are working on the design. I've got a schedule coming up here in a minute to show that. And we plan on starting to implement this sooner than later. So this fall winter time frame is we're hoping to get started on it. And we always want to keep looking forward. So there's going to be future phases to this project that we want to start thinking about as we're implementing this one, keep the momentum going. And one of the more complicated things that we're going to strive to do during this process, because it is a construction on a significant portion of the park, we're going to do our best to keep the community events active as they have been, as best we can, but understand we're trying to also build something fun and better. So that's one of our goals, is to maintain them as best we can, but we're going to have to work with the different groups that hold events in the park and work through them one by one and make sure that we can help them as best we can. So 90% designs coming quick, with final expected here in the next couple months. So, I mean, it's moving right along, and it needs to, because some of those elements are necessary to start up the treatment plant. We got to keep it moving. And with that, I hope that was fun to see some of the new images. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Any questions from the public? Any at this point? Okay. Council? Yes, Councilman Campbell.
I didn't see anything in there that looked like the windmill had been moved.
It has not. And
Is it still, is the moving it still in the system, or is it something that's on the back burner?
you know, the windmills it opens up a can of worms as far as conversation goes, because with the windstorms that we had, it had some damage to it, and we need to work on it.
Yeah.
So if anything happens, it would have to be something new someplace different if we moved it, because it's going to fall apart if we try and pick it up.
I understood a long time ago that we'd already been told it's got to be rebuilt. And
Yeah.
I thought the plan was to move it up to the north end of the, well, basically up there where the RV park is, in that area.
You know, and that's a great point. That is something that was identified early on, and I'm going back fast, I'm sorry, to
Okay.
the slide that I want to share. So you can, the intent early on as a potential was to put it as like the main entrance, and as we've looked at it more, it creates quite the roundabout.
Yeah, it is.
So I think it's probably best to save that for a workshop conversation to talk about where that's going to go. Because we could go, I mean, I have a half dozen ideas that we could, what we could do with it to make it better.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilor Wassinger.
Thank you. I have a more current question. So I know we were told to be forewarned that the playground equipment is nearing the end of its life. That's down there now currently, next to the lagoon there. What is the update on that playground equipment? Are you going to try and hold that out as long as you can to start doing this, or is that going to go sooner?
I believe it's going to go sooner than later. I think it's in a state that it needs to be removed.
And I didn't see in any of this phase one. So if that goes, and I very much appreciate the splash park and how that really looks appropriate. Many splash parks you see, when I look at pictures or see others in our region, they're more geared towards toddlers and little bitty kids. And that to me seemed very much functional for even like preteens and elementary school age kids and anybody, me, you know, that would want to walk through it and get wet if it was really hot out. I really appreciate that it looked very wide range of ages. But I do think that if that playground equipment goes, and my concern is that I didn't see any other playground equipment in any of these pictures. Now I know there's a small set over on the ball field side. Again, it's just some swings and some other older equipment that looks like it's getting aged out too. That maybe we need to find something somewhere to add in something for the.
That is something actually that we're working on. I believe it's Bailey's Playground that's over there. That was a donated playground area for toddlers. That there's a group interested in improving that. At the same time, we know that there's a need for to replace that playground that's there now. So there's plans for future phases for that. We're trying to figure out if we can implement it sooner than later. We're still in discussions trying to figure out how to do that.
Well, yeah, because you don't want to disrupt any of the. I mean, right now where it is, isn't that right where the splash park would be?
I know.
Where it's sitting right now. I mean, you have to find a place for it, I would assume. And
we do, and we have plans for a substantial playground south of the ball fields and possibly over the southern field. So we might have to move things around a little bit to get it incorporated, but it's something that has come up more than once, and it's certainly something that you got to have in a park as a playground, right?
Yes,
so
that's why I'm asking, because I know that one's going to go. And then also included in these plans, as we plan this phase one and all of these nice features that all look so beautiful, I have a great concern about vandalism and graffiti, and I know we've been round and round about security cameras and what can we do. So I have just a great concern that we invest this, and we all work so hard in our public to do this and invest in this. I would just hate to see it vandalized. So I would like to see a plan to maybe make it secure and deter some of that vandalism, graffiti, littering that we see.
Understood, and we feel the same way.
Thank you.
Councilor Servadius.
Thank you, Mayor. Lots of notes here. Ready? So we've seen a lot of different drawings, and at first I was a little nervous about this thing getting overly developed, overly programmed. I see the space down there as holding festivals, you know, the carnival, car shows. So I want to make sure we've got enough space to do that, as well as providing appropriate programming for the citizens. One of the first things that pops out at me, and you touched on it, was we had talked about an eastern stage area in the early stages tied to that circular or near that circular plaza. And you referenced it as possibly being more substantial than the gateway. I'm going to call it the gateway pavilion is what you labeled it. But I see nothing referencing any kind of a stage now on the eastern side of the park.
It's intended for another phase. It's going to be, if I can go, let's see if I can use, if we can use our imagination a little bit, maybe I can get to this. Well, so I don't have a good pointer with me, but you can see where the, I got pointer man coming here. Thanks, Steve. So it's intended to go right in this little pocket here, is where the stage is intended to go, and it shows, you can see it on, it's that paved area that you see, if I can avoid hitting Doug. It's that area right there is intended to be the stage, and this whole area is grass and field area for setup of the carnival, concerts, soccer fields.
Okay. And that's where I'm trying to look ahead, was making sure we have room for the carnivals. I mean, the carnival takes up a bunch of space. So then looking at this, if we go to the most recent drawing, not that one, the paths on the north side of the park, there's 3 bisecting north-south. I'm assuming those are paths. What are those?
Those are paths, correct.
Where are they going?
Well, it's to connect the two, and you know, one of the concepts that we were trying to work with on this is there's some hope that, you know, as this is intended to be a catalyst for improvements, we also hope that the park improvements be a catalyst for improvements. So we want to leave room for opportunity to access the park along this north edge. And so that's why that's like that.
I share that hope, but there's a fence there right now. Can we not invest any money and just keep the easement? It can't be that expensive to put a path in. Right now, you can't get through there during the 4th of July because of the fences on the backside of that property. So unless those property owners take those fences down, why don't we just leave that space designated? I have a hard time putting the money in there when you can't, it's a path to nowhere.
Understood. Okay, we'll talk with the consultant about that.
So I'm all for having an easement across, you know, running east-west across the top there, but until that does happen and develop, which could be 5 years, could be 50, I'm hard-pressed to put any money in those paths. They seem to be going nowhere. I understand the concept and the hope, though. The splash park I'm intrigued by, and I very much like it. I've heard from a couple of folks, and I don't know if I said this in a previous meeting, we went to a retirement at Tulalip, the casino, and I saw the faux stonework that was there. It's incredible. It looks real. And I'd never been up close at the Tulalip casino. And I thought, wow, that'll be great if we have some of that here. But then I've also heard from some folks, what do the toddlers do? And I really like this splash park, but I'm wondering if I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and you guys may have received some feedback on this, is can we still somehow incorporate, and it might have been that pirate ship feature, but something that the littlest of kids, a parent might not feel comfortable about their kid jumping off a 2-foot boulder, even though it would look aesthetically beautiful and be fun to sit there and watch the water. You're trying to work on something a little more toddler friendly, I'll say, not just kid.
Well, there's multiple things to look at as toddler friendly. I had my little girl's, she was probably 5 years old before she figured out how to put her hands out in front of her. She's probably embarrassed if she sees this, but she just didn't have the coordination, and I get it. So you got to make sure that toddlers, it's fall protection and things like that, protect them. And we're intended to put some of that spongy material down in the bottom so that helps with that, so that it's safe for toddlers. Then the other question is the equipment that's being provided appropriate for toddlers and for older children, that, you know, so it's fun for everybody. And that's where we got some feedback about, you know, the little kids really like the water that falls, you know, and things like that. So it's gentler. It doesn't, you know, it's not as, it's easier on them to play with. And we're hoping that some of these things are active, so they're excited when they hit this, that happens, and so they run back and forth. They hit this, they run and jump in the water and play in it, and they got to go back. And that helps us with water conservation too, because it only activates when they activate it and play with it. And there's one, just to continue on, remember the splash parks, there's a limited time of year that it's really fun to play in the water, on the waterfront in Oak Harbor. So we wanted to design something that was year round as well, so you could play there when the water features were off.
Sure. So, and I'm sure you're having these conversations, but when we think of other things that we could not, whether it's playground equipment, splash pools, we can't maintain, you just mentioned a spongy material, and while that would be safe and a nice addition, lifetime on something like that, I mean, is that in 2 or 3 years we're wondering where we're going to come up with 40 grand to put new foam down?
I don't have an answer for you on that, but it is pretty common to use that material in playgrounds now. Okay. So if it can stand up to the test of toddlers and little kids beating it up on a daily basis, I think we'll probably be okay for a little while.
So I would just really encourage you guys to take a hard look at, rather than in 5 to 10 years replacing that material, could we spend that money right now on an additional, I'm looking, that pirate ship was more to the east of that, have a small pad, and it doesn't have to be that big. I mean, I've seen kids just in an area like this, but little things that shoot up, the littlest of guys would have a ball in that, whereas the 5, 6 preteens could wander over to the bigger rock section. I just want to create something that we don't have the money to maintain.
You know, and
right.
You may not have had the opportunity to sit in the meetings with our design team. You've met Gil before, though.
Right.
I mean, he's brought in some help from his team. They're truly professionals, and this is what the kind of thing, not only that they do, but they really enjoy doing. So I have a lot of confidence that they're going to hit all these marks that you're talking about. I really do.
Okay. I just want to make sure we can pay for them and maintain them.
Sure.
And the last thing that jumped out at me, the shelters, specifically the eastern shelter, it's facing the condos. You hinted at keeping out of the wind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if our concern is a westerly or if it's more from the south. Why are we, the shelter is facing the condos. Wouldn't you want it to look out at the water?
It's an interesting point. I think the idea is that you'd be able to use that facility and see your kids playing in the playground, is the idea for the rotation of it at that point.
It's open on 3.
We can work with them on the rotation of it. That's one of the easier things to work with.
If it's open on 3 sides and there is a future playground there, you'd be looking out one side. It's just, it's interesting that it's facing the condos over there. So that's my thought on that one. And you answered the timeline question, it looks like. So that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes, Mayor Brooklyn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, that easement on the north side of the park, which was planned extension of Bayshore Drive, is it going away and we have more park area, or still in the plan to upgrade that in the future? Because the only access now by vehicle is by City Beach Park going to the clean water facility. If this road is improved, extension of Bayshore Drive, there'll be another access to the clean water facility.
You know, I can't remember the resolution, but it's been quite 3 years ago or better that we chose not to extend Bayshore through the park. It's been some time, but that's how the treatment plant ended up in the location it's at. I don't believe there's an easement along the north edge. What you're seeing on the graphic there is actually a sidewalk. There, for as far as access for, say, car shows and carnivals, there's a planned access at the top right corner of that crescent to get into the park. And as far as parking goes, you can kind of see a shift. We've chosen the Beeksma side as the primary access to the park, and that's why a bulk of the parking is on that side. We are retaining parking along City Beach and around the south side of the treatment plant, just not to the same extent that it might be now, or maybe it's a little bit more structured than it is now. It's, if I can find that. So you can see the parking stalls aren't highlighted real well in this image, but you can see to the north of that, the Circle Plaza area, that little notch out is all parking stalls, and there's some parallel stalls against the ball fields, and we've tried to maintain as many as we can over there.
So with the, excuse me, during 4th of July festivities, vehicles are allowed in the park to set up their stores. Will they still be available to access the vehicles going to the park?
Yes, certainly. The top right corner of that crescent is going to have a driveway cut in it so that it has prescribed access so they don't drive over a curb or some other interesting way. And we'll make sure that that area is bolstered so that it can handle the traffic. And we haven't got to that part of the design yet, but there's different ways you can do that and be able to drive on it and not ruin the grass.
Good. Thank you. That's all.
Councilor Allenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions here. Start out with the shelters. Will those be reserved and rented only? Or are they going to be open for random use?
The exterior portions will be open for, let me see if I can phrase this the right way. If you've rented the pavilion, you get the outdoor space where the picnic tables are as well.
Right.
But if it's not in use, you're only going to be able to get to the picnic tables. The interior part's going to be locked.
So then how do you provide security and prevention of hangouts? You know, we just moved a shelter from Ramalli out to the marina. Aren't we setting up a collection point for hangouts that we really don't want in there?
You know, it's a tough balance. One of the things that we're looking at right now is potentially expanding the interior space and having fewer outside picnic tables.
Or some type of screening?
I understand where you're coming from, and it's a concern of ours as well, but it's kind of, we want to have something that works well for the community and can work a long time, but not design it so that it's, I'm trying to find the right way to phrase this, and I can't. But we can only do so much to keep the undesirable element out, and we'll do the best we can to design it so it stands the test of time.
So the next item is traffic related. Whenever somebody does a development in this community by ordinance, they have to do half-street improvements adjacent to their project. Beeksma Drive extends from Bayshore all the way down to the southern entrance. Will we be doing street improvements down Bayshore, or will it remain open ditch with no sidewalks?
We are not intending to do that as part of this phase. It is intended to be as part of phase 2. So if you look at the whole project as a whole, that is something we intend to do.
Why wouldn't you do that in the first phase? It's part of the utility structures, all that stuff that has to be done.
It doesn't have to be done right now. It can be done later, and it might make more sense to do that as part of the whole entrance to the park that might come all the way from Pioneer Way into the park.
Okay. Then the next question regarding this is, what's the rationale for the current alignment of the intersection of Beeksma and Bayshore? It's such an offset, it doesn't make any sense to me from a traffic standpoint.
Yeah, I've been looking at that intersection ever since I started with the city, and we had some ideas on some improvements we could do when we were working on Pioneer Way even.
Why would we have an offset like that?
Let me make sure I understand your
Well,
question.
look at the,
So you're
no, go to phase one, the other one, over to Beeksma Drive. There you go. Up there where on one of your previous illustrations, you have a roundabout there that integrates that whole intersection so traffic flows. This particular diagram shows the entrance to the park pushed to the north west corner of the park's property line, and it doesn't align with left turn movements coming off of Beeksma or a straight in movement coming off of Bayshore. It just looks like an odd layout.
You know, and I don't disagree with you on that one. The interesting part on that is that the Beeksma to the west is centered on what would have been the property line as it crosses to the north of the park, since and we don't own anything to the north, so we're maintaining that entrance entirely on city property.
Well, why
so
don't
that
you
shifted
pull it
it all
south?
to this. That we had to pull it to the south in order to keep it all on our property.
Can't you pull it farther south so it aligns with Bayshore?
It actually right now is probably south of Bayshore as it is. That would be my guess, but I would imagine it is.
The diagram
from
I
what
have
know.
doesn't align that way, but
Yeah, it doesn't show that way.
so
Okay.
yeah, it's from this level.
Well, if we need to move it,
It
further
looks
south to
awkward.
line up, that's easy.
Yeah, okay. Then the next thing. The phase regarding the clean water facility and all the park, the next slide over.
Mm-hmm.
I understand why it makes sense to have Carollo and Hoffman totally involved in that, because it's all interrelated with the movement of all of that soil, or at least most of that soil, and also with the interrelated utilities that go with that improvement. And you've also explained about, you know, the funding and the mitigation and things that go with that. Now, I understand Hoffman and Carollo and that whole team being involved in that. But then when I go to the next slide off to the left, when we start talking about shelters and basketball courts and special events buildings and a parking lot and stuff like that, I don't want to pay Hoffman and Carollo to do that work. We can pay them to do the design work, but I don't want to pay them. They're too big to do that little work. We have a budget that's going to be really worked on. It has to be worked on. $10 million, and then Carollo, you know, they get their fee on top of fee from their subs, and then Hoffman does the same thing, and Hoffman's fee for management is over 4%, and then self-perform work is 8%, and you're talking about $12 million. There's a lot of fees punched into that thing.
I can respond to that. We talked about this early on when we were trying to start on phase one and how we were going to address that. It's trying to split a baby, really, because you have all the soil that needs to be moved around the entire site, and then on top of that you have the park improvements that are coming from a different funding source potentially. So how do you package that and bid it and have Hoffman finish their responsibility? It got complicated, so the easiest way was to have Carollo do the design work.
I
now,
understand
the reason
that.
why Hoffman's staying involved for the construction is because all the earthwork that's involved with creating this plan is the byproduct of that pile of dirt that's out there.
And I understand that part too. As you have explained, we all understand, there's approximately, up next to finished floor, about 7 feet of fill that's going to go in there, plus or minus. And then it tapers out, mostly toward the water and going to the west. But when we get into those improvements over on the far side over there, if we can save $500,000, that's a big deal. If we can save $1 million, that's a bigger deal. And before I would vote for going on those contracts on the construction side of it, I understand the design side has to stay there, but on the construction side of it, you're probably going to see me with my heels dig in if I see Hoffman building
picnic shelters and basketball courts, okay? That's all I have to say.
Fair enough. I tell you what, I'll grab a shovel and you grab a shovel and we'll get working on that picnic shelter. How's that?
Well, you know what? We did that with the boardwalk, so.
It worked.
Be careful what you're saying.
the point I'm trying to make is that there's a certain, we can draw a line in where we stop the contract with Hoffman. They have to bid the work unless they self-perform it, and we don't intend to have them self-perform it. So they have to go with low bids. So
Now,
we'll
I
put it out.
understand the bid part of it, but also when they sub it out, they put fee on top of fee. The subs put fees in there too, an overhead too. And then we end up with all of our other team, a good team for doing wastewater treatment plants. But you have KVA and you have the whole gang in there. And, you know, I don't feel really good about spending that kind of money on park improvements when I know a lot of that work can be done locally and not by a major contractor who does big civil projects. Okay.
Fair enough.
Okay. We'll have this discussion as we move down the road.
Councilor Campbell.
One short one. As a way to do the right political thing with the community, I would suggest that you or someone from your organization go down to the entrance that you've got planned there and talk to those two car places down there, those two mechanicals, those two shops. I went down there not too long ago and just asked them, have you got any idea what we're doing to Windjammer Park? Not a clue. That's anything. And I personally, I'm not construction, but I don't think that we can do anything like you're talking here without having some sort of impact with those folks.
You know, we've talked with the owner, Mike Corbin, and he was actually invited to be part of the citizen advisory group.
Right.
So we haven't gone and talked to the tenants specifically, and we can do that.
Well, talk to the owner anyway to tell him where you stand today, because if you're going to impact that, that's going to cause us a lot of grief.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council?
8 minutes.
Anything else? Councilor Allenberg?
Thank you. Joe, good presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other comments, I think that we are done with that item and done with our meeting tonight. We stand adjourned.